All right, let's see if this works here. All right, so probably most of you are going to be bored by this because it's stuff that you've seen before, but let me just give you a little bit of idea of what's going on in the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. For those of you that don't know the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, it's a private foundation that has been funded by Gordon and Betty, and Gordon and Betty are still alive. We have the advantage of our founders still being alive, and both of them are very strong conservationists, and one of the four main programs in the foundation is the environment program. I was a part of Foundations of Success up until about a year and almost a half ago, and came over to the Moore Foundation basically in December of 2016. So I'm a relatively newcomer here, but I think you're going to see a lot of things that again are familiar to you all in the work that you do. And if I could get this to move. All right, so I'm not going to go over this. This is the list of questions that you've all seen already. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of our approach. One of the things that we have going for us is what's called the Statement of Founders' Intent, and it was a really interesting exercise where actually Gordon and Betty's son, Ken Moore, who is now the head of one of the programs at the foundation and used to run the evaluation program, sat down with his parents and said, okay, what do you really want out of this foundation? And you read this thing, and it's really, again, for those of us that are involved in the open standards, CCNet, CMP, it's kind of hard not to have chills go up your spine when you read this, because it's almost like someone took the charter of CMP and put it into the words of the foundation. So there's a lot of similarity in the way that the foundation thinks about adaptive management and achieving results to what is in the open standards. Just to give you a little bit of a taste here, this is just one slide of one of our core values, and this core value is a discipline approach. So we take a systematic evidence-based approach. And if you look at some of the words in the bullets here, again, you'll get an idea of the way that the foundation really aspires to operate. So we're evidence-based, we have theories of change, we test our assumptions, we evaluate our impact, we focus on learning and improvement, we establish outcomes, which basically for the open standards, we set clear goals, basically. We implement full cycles of planning, whether that be the open standards full cycle of planning or DEMIT's cycle of planning. We focus on that. We try to look at both successes and failures, and there is a culture of at least the board constantly saying that we value failures, but staff has a hard time kind of operationalizing that. And that we stay informed and making decisions based on knowledge analysis and external input. So this should give you a little bit of a flavor of what we aspire to within the foundation. More recently, we've been completely using the open standards as a way of implementing our projects. And for those of you who are old enough to have been around, at least in the Conservation Measures Partnership for a long time, in 2010, we did this study in CMP where it was called streamlining. And the whole idea was looking at how could we work across foundations, how can the conservation community work across foundations in a way that we don't have to keep on doing the exact same things in terms of writing reports and writing multiple reports for multiple donors when in fact it could be the same report that we could generate for all of those. And one of the obstacles that we found is that it's really hard in these foundations that have environment or conservation just as one of their programs to change just the environment program and not the rest of the foundation. There was a lot of resistance to changing the way things happen or operate within a conservation program if it's in the context of a broader donor situation. And so in our case, not only do we have the environment, but we also have patient care, we have a science program, we have a Bay Area program that focuses both on conservation and tech museums in the San Francisco Bay Area. So to change just the conservation unit would be a bit of an obstacle. The interesting thing for the Moore Foundation is that increasingly open standards are becoming our standards for the entire foundation and not just for the conservation community. In this slide, the part that's in green basically shows the part of the program that I work with primarily. That is the environment program that's run by Eileen Lee. And we have 3 directors that run initiatives. We work basically under the grant-making structure of initiatives where we're trying to achieve big goals and objectives, and those are all designed to fit into these 3 initiatives. I'm part of the Measurement, Evaluation, and Learning Office, and Deborah Perez is the head of that. So what steps were taken to encourage or to incentivize change management? I'd like to say this is the carrot approach, but this is actually the pizza approach. And what I think this is a good illustration of is what I did when I first came into the foundation was actually do or work on whatever program officers thought was the most important thing to work on, whether that be a pepperoni slice or a pepper slice or olive slice. It really didn't make a difference. Whether it be conceptual models, theories of change, indicators, monitoring and evaluation plans, it didn't make a difference. I kind of met them where they were. And so it was purely demand driven, certainly for the first year. It continues to be as well. But at the same time, we kind of have this stick approach. This is just actually today, this was just formally announced to staff or shared with staff. It's called our approach to philanthropy. And it is a way of trying to codify adaptive management for the entire foundation. And in this approach to philanthropy document, we talk about a couple of things that are, again, relevant to the work that we all do. Outcomes-based, adaptive management, theories of change. So here you see it going from the conservation program to the entire foundation. Some of the expertise that's important, the expertise of being able to be a good coach, being able to kind of know who you're working with, what they need to do, what they want to do, how to do it. That's really important. Also, working among different teams and across teams is really important. Important lessons from the Conservation Measures Partnership. And my 17 years with FOS certainly got me ready to go to work with the foundation in terms of dealing with lots of different tools and lots of different situations, both training and coaching and doing analytical work as well. We primarily capture data through Excel and we use Marathi, and increasingly we're using Marathi not only for the conservation program, but for the entire foundation as well. And more recently, we've been working with Annette in particular and helping us capture a lot of our data and use Power BI to be able to present that and share that more broadly. Some of the challenges that I face, and I think probably the biggest one is just this idea of inertia, right? People are used to doing things a certain way. One of the interesting things that our president said was when he and I were talking about how I thought there was lots of differences across the 4 different programs. He said, I don't think the problems or the differences are among the programs. He said, I think every single person in this foundation thinks they know exactly what adaptive management is. They practice it, and there's 100 people in the foundation. And he said, I can guarantee you there's probably 100 different ways here of doing adaptive management. So everybody thinks they're doing it right. Everybody's doing it differently, and to change at an institutional level is a real challenge. So what's been achieved? I'm going to show you some things. This is all relatively new, where the open standards and all these concepts that are in the open standards have just recently started to be adopted within the foundation. And so I can't tell you that there are lots of outcomes yet. There certainly are a lot of outputs. So some things that you'll be familiar with. Here's a typical results chain from a Marathi file from one of our programs, the Marine Conservation Initiative. Here's a mapping exercise. This is also something that Annette's been helping us with in Power BI, is really trying to look at using data in creative ways that can communicate in ways that we haven't in the past. Here's a more sophisticated system-wide theory of change that we kind of ripped off from the Walton Foundation with Foundations of Success's help. And so you can see there's a lot of similarities, not similarities, it's direct use of the open standards. This is an interesting one where we used a theory of change to articulate the embedded assumptions in a conservation enterprise approach to conservation with the articulated learning questions along the way. And increasingly, we're using these theories of change and results change as a way of framing these questions, obviously for monitoring and evaluation, but also for learning. And so for a long time, the foundation has been talking about doing this, but it's just now starting to understand the best way to do that. Other things that have been achieved, this is something I just shared with the entire foundation a couple of weeks ago. The president said, okay, well, how do you take these open standards and apply them across the foundation? Can you pick something that has nothing at all to do with conservation? So I chose this thing of how do you lose weight? You know, the conventional wisdom says you have to exercise running on a treadmill. How would you test those assumptions? What are the methods down below that you would use to measure those? The question marks represent questions along the way that you would ask. And because we talk about failure a lot in the foundation, the small f's represent smaller failures that you could potentially encounter much earlier in the implementation of your project, as opposed to a big failure at the very end. You don't want to wait to the very end to be addressing failure. So we were able to capture all the open standards and put them into a format that's applicable to the whole foundation. One of the things I'm most excited about, again, today, this was just released. This is just one page out of that approach to philanthropy that we are adopting as the Moore Foundation approach to philanthropy. But again, just look at this. Look at the theory of, look at the results chain that's straight out of Moratti. Look at the terminology, strategy, activities, intermediate results. For us are those blue boxes in the chain. But we have goals and objectives. Project outcome is the target, but basically we've ripped off completely the open standards, which of course was a ripoff of a lot of systems before it as well. I also just want to mention we kind of have our own approach to having a project cycle, which is this one. It's a fairly generic one that I found related to environment, to an education program. And we have something called the life cycle management, which is just basically that cycle stretched out onto a straight line. But it is divided into these two phases of design, planning, and implementation, monitoring, and learning. And so if you look at those blue headers, you'll see too that those correspond to project cycle management. But again, this is becoming this is becoming the structure of the way we're going to do all business within the foundation. So the last two slides, what recommendations? I would say hire, if you could, Harvey Feinberg, who is the president of the foundation, and Eileen Lee, who's the chief program officer for the conservation program here. I would actually say don't you dare, because if you did, none of this stuff would ever happen in the foundation. We've talked, at least in the Conservation Measures Partnership, for a long time about the need to get to upper management and have upper management buy into this. This is a case where upper management already bought into it, and they were just looking for a way to implement it, to operationalize it. So I could not have asked for a better situation to walk into. I can't imagine when you're trying to implement something like the open standards in a situation in which upper management does not buy into it. So to me, these two people are the folks that have enabled it to happen within the foundation. So in summary, what are some of the other recommendations? Of course, in addition to having the right leaders at the top, I think it's really important to be extremely clear about what you're trying to do. One of the things that has not happened, that has not been successful in the program, in the foundation in the past, is people just doing a lot of stuff, doing, related to monitoring and evaluation, adaptive management, without being really clear why they're doing it, what purpose is it serving, how does it support management and program. And so it really created this fatigue in the foundation of just being overwhelmed by tools and activities versus being clear about what goals and objectives are. Follow demand, but create a supply edge. And what I mean by this is eat that piece of pizza as much as you can, but be constantly aware of places where you can kind of expose people to new things to make them hungry for a different piece of pizza, so that they're going to go out and look, they're going to ask you to fill a demand that they didn't even know existed before. And so you're kind of creating demand as you're following and satisfying demand. Be prepared for any entry point that presents itself. That is, whenever somebody says, I need you to do something in that project cycle that we work under, be prepared to do that. And don't say, no, you got to start at the front, at the beginning. You know, I want you to first do a conceptual model. Don't do that. If they want you to work with an indicator, start with indicators and work your way back and then work your way forward. Think about systems. So again, think about the context within which you're working and not the specific tools. It's what I find is that people value so much more the common sense and thinking and logic that's implicit in the open standards and not the tools themselves, but also be clear about what those tools are and how to use those, and be really good at using those tools, again, so that at any point in that cycle you could jump in and use them. And finally, use your network. I've been using lots of folks in CMP and CCNet coaches as well. The foundation can continue to use that network and is probably going to use it a lot more in the future. But there's no way that I could have done this without the help of folks from Foundations of Success or Annette, who have really been helping me push this forward. So we have a great network. I would say continue to use it. Look for any opportunity you can to tap into your colleagues. That's it.